Hi classmates, my name is Alexis Arajo and I'm going to be talking to you today about what I chose to do for my applied project. So the title of my project is Using Functional Communication Training, FCT, to Increase Manding in a Nonverbal Child Diagnosed with Autism Spectrum Disorder. So, Manding is a critical communication skill that supports access to preferred items, reduces frustration, and it promotes independence in children. So, that is why I chose this specific behavior to increase for my project, because I think that this skill is an important skill to have, especially when especially when the child will go with to school, especially when he is with caregivers that aren't familiar with him, or if he's just ever in a setting where he has to get his needs across and he is able to do that using MANS. So this study aimed to answer the question, will functional communication training will functional communication training increase Manding behavior during ABA sessions? So this study was conducted in the clinical setting, and it was a 1-to-1 ratio, so it was just me and the participant. And the participant was a 6-year-old male. His pseudonym is Max Jones. He is diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, and he is nonverbal. So teaching this skill is socially significant because it promotes independence and it teaches the child to request in words. So this is the reason why I chose this behavior, because I wanted to teach him something that would be important for him to have in his toolbox if he's ever in a situation, or for instance whenever he does go to school, as right now he is full-time in the clinic, but it is an important skill to have and it would just also foster independence and just promote that independence and improve communication skills by being able to mand. Previous research by Lou Korolewicz in 2021 used functional communication training to increase communication and decrease challenging behaviors. So this previous research just shows how functional communication training can be used to increase communication skills and also decrease challenging behaviors by replacing that with functional communication training instead of the challenging behavior. Additionally, functional communication training has been used in a study conducted by Banerjee et al. 2022 with bilingual children, and this study was conducted with preschool-aged children who functional communication training was used to increase their MANS, and the results of their study found that functional communication training increased English and Spanish MANS, and so this was important and it related to my project because that is exactly what I'm trying to establish with this study. Alakazami and Chityo found increased functional communication responses from their study and decreased self-injurious behavior. So they use functional communication training to decrease self-injurious behavior, and that is typically something that I have seen when I was doing research. I saw that a lot of the research on functional communication training is being used as a replacement behavior for challenging behavior, and so that is a very important skill to be able to replace it with functional communication. However, there is a gap in the literature between using functional communication training to increase MANS only rather than just decrease the behavior and promote functional communication. So this study will hopefully bridge that gap. So this study used a multiple baseline across settings, research design, and the independent variable was functional communication training and the dependent variable was Manding. So data was collected using frequency recording, and so during the first 5 days, data was collected for baseline, and responses were recorded and they were not corrected. So If there were mans, we would mark it. If there were no mans, then there were no mans. So for the puzzle room, the classroom, and the pretend play room, I will go in during the results section and kind of explain that, but there were 3 settings that I was taking baseline data in, and I staggered which date to introduce the intervention. So the puzzle room was the first setting, and so the intervention was introduced on April 13th, and then the intervention was introduced in the classroom on April 14th, and then on April 15th, that's when the intervention was introduced in the pretend playroom. And as you can see, based on the data, I will go in and explain the data in a little bit. So during the intervention phase, there were contrived opportunities with preferred items, and these items were kind of contrived to where Max had to manned in order to gain access to the item. And so the contrived opportunities were to evoke a manned independently from Max, and then if needed, we used least to most prompting. So the results of this study found that for baseline for each room, you can see in the puzzle room the highest number of mans were on day 4, and there were 4 mans. So that is the highest number of mans that he had during those 5 days of baseline. His baseline is 4 mans. And then in the in the classroom, the highest number of mans were 3. And in pretend play, the highest number of mans were also 3. So it looks like during baseline, there were lower numbers. And so as you can see, after implementing the intervention in the puzzle room, you see an increasing trend. On the first day, he already had 6 independent mans, and independent mans were counted and prompted mans were also counted. However, we use least to most prompting, so I would first show the item and then see if he could independently do it, and then if he needed additional prompting, I would full verbal prompt him and then partial verbal prompt, and the prompts were faded as the session interval went on. And so you can see in the puzzle room, during the intervention, the highest number of mans he got was 10 in the puzzle room, which is astronomically different than 4. So as you can see, you see an increasing trend, and that is important because it shows me that the intervention was working in the puzzle room. So then moving on to the classroom, you also see an increasing trend with 11 mans being the highest number of mans during the intervention phase. And so you can just tell how functional communication training helped his independent mans, and it helped him to be able to man for the items because the expectation was already set, and you can just tell that from baseline compared to intervention that 3 mans compared to 11 mans, there's an increasing trend. And then moving on to the pretend play room, there is an increasing trend almost in a straight line, which is kind of funny, but you can see how after implementing the intervention, they just shot up from there. So the highest number of mans he had were 9 in pretend play. And so the mans were also contrived based off of each room. So preferred items were specific to that room. And so I just took whatever items I knew he loved from those rooms, and then I kept them with me. And then that is how he gained access to those items. So the data can be different in each room, and it is different in each room. His favorite room is the puzzle room, and as you can tell, that is where he had the highest number of mans. So it is just based on the results, functional communication training improved the frequency of independent mans emitted by Max, which shows that this intervention is working for this to increase the dependent variable, which is Manding. So, for the discussion, functional communication training can be used to increase age appropriate commands in children. So, this just shows how functional communication training can be used as a way of building communication skills. And this is especially important for schools and clinics and other caregivers to be able to use to replicate this study and these procedures to help develop language and ultimately help develop social skills, which would help in the areas that most kids with autism lack, social skills and language. So those are just two of the things that are able to blossom as a result of being able to build upon these MANs. The implications of the study are that MAN training is successful when paired with motivation from the learner, and that functional communication training can be used to increase a behavior, and not, as compared to previous research, it is not only to be used with as a replacement behavior for challenging behavior. It can be used to increase as well. So that is what this study shows. Some potential limitations to the study are that it is not individualized. So people could argue that it's not applicable to the entire population because it only had a sample size of 1. However, that is an area that future studies could improve upon. They could add more participants, and then maybe they could do it for a longer period of time to see how, if you were to keep going with it, how much functional communication training could improve the number of independent MANs. So that is what I learned. What I learned from the study is that functional communication training does work, and especially when you're using it to increase MANs in a nonverbal child, that paired with the motivation of that child, they are motivated to get what you want. And so MAN training is something that I really like to do, and I just love to see how my participant specifically went from leading my hand, pointing, to knowing that the expectation was that I wanted him to man, so he attempted, and all attempts were reinforced, obviously, praise and the preferred item that he wanted. However, he just knew that in order to get what I want, yeah, I can pull her hand, yes, I can point to it, but I'm also going to, the expectation was that I wanted him to man for it. And so he picked up on that very quickly. And that is something that I really enjoyed doing. I loved MAN training with him, and I loved using functional communication training to build his communication skills. And I'm so excited for him to go from using 1-word MANs to 2-word MANs, 3-word MANs, and then hopefully full sentences. And I am so excited for his future, and I'm very excited to see how using functional communication training and modeling will help benefit him in the long run with his communication skills. Thank you so much for listening to my project, and thank you.